And I am going to ask Mr. Evans to call the roll in just a minute, but before we do that, just for the sake of the public that's here with us tonight visiting and viewing the meeting and those who are watching at home, I'm just going to make some quick introductions so everyone knows who the folks are up here. So to my far left, your right, is Mr. Lambert, who's a member of this board. Then to his right is Vice Chairman Eisenbacher. This is Ms. Kupa, and to my left, and she is a member of this board, but she's also a liaison for our board to the Planning Commission. She serves on the Planning Commission. I'm Glenn Clark, the chairman of this board. To my right is Mr. Desmond, a member as well. To his right is one of our newest members, Mr. McCauley. And then, of course, on the end is Mr. Agawis, who is a member of the board as well. And on the side of the dais is Mr. Evans, who is our liaison to the city administration here in the city of Troy. And then on the end is Ms. Dufresne, who is assistant city attorney for the city of Troy, and she will serve as our legal advisor to this board on legal issues here tonight. So without any further ado, Mr. Evans, we are prepared for the roll.
Mr. Clark?
I'm here.
Mr. Agawis?
Here.
Mr. Desmond?
Here.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Here.
Mr. McCauley?
Here.
Mr. Lambert?
Here.
Ms. Kupa?
Here.
So we have quorum, and of course we have a full board here tonight. The next item on the agenda are the procedures for this board, and I'm going to call on Vice Chairman Eisenbacher to read for the public's better understanding of how we operate our rules and procedures as we proceed tonight, both for the board but also for the public who wishes to participate.
Thank you. The Zoning Board of Appeals is a group of 7 of your neighbors appointed by Troy City Council to decide on requests for variances and other matters that are brought before them. A variance is a relaxation of the literal provisions of the zoning ordinance. Petitioners must indicate a hardship or practical difficulty with the land that would warrant the granting of the variance. Procedure. The board will hear the items in the order they appear on the agenda. When an item is called, the chairman will verify that the petitioner is present. Then the city administration will summarize the facts of the case. The petitioner will then be given an opportunity to address the board to explain the justification for the action requested. After the petitioner makes their presentation and answers any questions that the board may have, the chairman will open the public hearing. Any person wishing to speak on the request should raise their hand, and when recognized by the chairman, come up to the podium. The speaker should identify themselves with name and address, indicate their relationship to the property in question, for example, next door neighbor, live behind the property, etc., and state whether they are in favor of or against the variance request and give reasons for their opinion. Comments must be directed through the chairman. Comments should be kept as brief as possible and closely pertain to the matter under consideration. Only one person will be recognized by the chairman to speak at one time. At the conclusion of public comments, the chairman will close the public hearing. Once the public hearing is closed, no other public comment will be taken unless in response to a specific question by a member of the board. The board will then make a motion to approve, deny, or postpone the request. In order for the request to pass, a minimum of 4 votes are needed. If the request is not granted, the applicant has the right to appeal the board's decision to Oakland County Circuit Court.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Eisenbacher. We now move on to our item number 3, which are the approval of the minutes for the last meeting, which was October 17th. And I'd like to call on Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
Yes, I have an amendment to make to the minutes. The first item that we approved at the last meeting, I had made an amendment that it would be as built, and that was not reflected in the minutes. I'm losing my page. So that was item number 5A, amendment 3, which was to grant the variance, and that was to grant the variance as built, not with any future infringements into the setback. So with that amendment, I would move it to approve.
So to clarify your motion, because we don't have to amend, you can't amend something that hasn't been moved.
Oh.
So if your motion is to take what has been presented to the public and to the board tonight plus what you are suggesting, then that is the main motion.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Is there a second to this
Second.
motion? Mr. Desmond seconds. So any discussion on the Eisenbacher-Desmond motion? Mr. Lambert?
Just a question for the Assistant City Attorney. Is that an appropriate language to use for a motion?
Yes, that's fine. That works.
Good.
Oh, that's
Thank
really
you.
loud.
Any other discussion? See none. Mr. Evans, we're prepared for a vote.
Mr. Agawas.
Yes.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. McCauley.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Koopa.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes. Motion passes. Now on item 4, approval of the agenda. From the board, is there any comment or concerns about what has been presented to you before tonight's meeting for this board meeting? Mr. Evans?
Staff does have one under miscellaneous business. We'd ask to add item C, update to October ZBA discussion. Near the end of the meeting, we discussed perhaps ways to make applicants a little more aware of, for example, construction permits requirements, and I do have a brief update for you.
Sure. Without objection, we will add that into the item number 7, agenda item 7C.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So now we move on to hearing of cases, and we have the first one is 5A, a variance request from Vanessa Mansour, related to 2110 Chalgrove. Mr. Evans, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The subject property is located in a single-family neighborhood north of Square Lake Road and west of Coolidge Highway. On the overhead, it's outlined in red at the top of the drawing. The subject address is 2110 Chalgrove. It's on the north side of Chalgrove. And what they want to do is add on to an existing covered deck, and that addition is going to encroach into the rear yard setback by 2 feet. Now, this is the site plan they've provided. The road is at the bottom. The small addition, which is a fireplace, is the red square there. It's circled. That's a close-up of it. So the encroachment is 6 feet wide by 2 feet deep, and the applicants provided a representative photo of what they intend to do, as well as this is the side view. This is the covered deck towards the back of the house, and the addition would go right here. Now, there is a section of the ordinance that does allow encroachments into rear yards, but they can only be no more than 3 feet wide. So this one's 6 feet wide, and because it does encroach into the required 45-foot rear yard setback by 2 feet, they need a variance from this board in order to proceed. So I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Any questions of staff? Mr. Lambert?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The petitioner in their statement of practical difficulties said, I'm requesting a variance to add a fireplace with set dimensions as an addition to an existing deck, in parentheses already approved. Does that mean approved by the building department or by your department?
The deck has been approved. It is a covered deck, and it is under construction.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing that there aren't any more members of the board who would like to inquire about this issue, we're going to call the petitioner forward. So please step to the podium, identify yourself and your relationship to the property, and pull the microphone towards you. There you go. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Vanessa Mansour, and I am the owner of 2110 Chalgrove, and I am requesting approval of my fireplace. Is that all you need?
You want to share any
Okay, so it's going to
facts
be...
or
Yeah, I mean, it's simply for the purpose of keeping warm within the enclosed fireplace, so our intent is not to have the smoke or any, it's like enclosed, and we're just using it to keep warm in the winter, so that's why we're requesting
Thank you.
the variance.
Any member of the board would like to ask the question of the petitioner, Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes, we've received a couple of comments from your neighbors not in favor of it. And looking at the plans, I'm curious why the fireplace, you've requested it in the back instead of the side of the deck.
Because there's really no room on the side of the deck. There's like, on the one side, there's a ladder going down, you know, used to go in and out of the deck. And on the other side, there's only a very small amount of room. We had considered doing it maybe on a corner, But again, I just don't think there's enough room.
Okay.
Mr. Lambert?
Another thing that Mr. Eisenbacher was probably referring to was the one neighbor has requested that as a condition of approving the variance that you put in some, it looks like some kind of trees or some kind of greenscaping at the back of your property line to kind of hide the back of your house from the other person's house. Is that something you'd be willing to do?
Yeah, I mean, it is our intent. We did have greenery prior to, I believe it was DTE or Consumer, one of those came in and they actually had to tear some of the trees that were back there down. So, I mean, we'd like the privacy as well. So it is our intent to do that in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else for this petitioner? Okay, you can have a seat.
Thank you.
Actually, I have a question.
Go ahead.
I thought somebody was going to say something. So I'm looking at, what is your practical difficulty with this? Why, I don't see why you need it. Why can't it be outside the 40-foot setback? Why can't it be closer to the house?
It could be, but if we did it closer, so the only thing that we considered prior to submitting for this variance is that we want it to be a wood-burning fireplace, and so if we bring it closer to the house, then it's going to be kind of like inside of the deck as opposed to through the exterior, and it probably would warm, the deck isn't really that large, so it probably would warm it a little too much having it that way. So we figured we'd try this before, having to do that if we must, so.
But that would be your alternative if you don't get approved
would
for
be
this
an
variance, you
alternative,
just
yes.
move it forward into the property.
Mr. Clark? What about getting something smaller that wouldn't require the variance? Instead of it being 6 foot wide, couldn't you get something that's smaller that maybe wouldn't require the 6 foot? Because a 2 foot depth is okay, but the 6 foot width is what's the problem. So if you got something smaller, we wouldn't have to grant the variance.
I was under the impression that the 2 foot was it's news to me as well, so.
Right? Didn't someone say the 3 foot?
36 inches width would be allowed to encroach,
Right.
but nothing
So-
wider than that.
So they wouldn't be even here asking for a variance if that was only 3 feet wide?
Right.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Like I said, it's news to me, so.
Anyone else for the petitioner? Okay, if you can have a seat.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So we are going to open up the public hearing. At this time, if you'd like to address the board on this matter, please come to the podium, identify yourself, help us with understanding where in the universe you are in relationship to this property in question.
My name is Jonathan Aronson. I live at 2137 Red Maple Drive. We are directly behind this, and the back of their house backs up to our backyard. This is a humongous house. We've got to be talking over 5,000 square feet. There are garages and parking parking structures for 7 cars on this thing. We've lived there 22 years or so. We have gone from having a 1,500 square foot ranch behind us to having what feels like a commercial building behind us. And if we can get the greenscaping, I've got no problems with what they're doing, okay? It's their property, I understand that. But I don't want to have to be seeing it all the time, and I'm sure they don't want to, in the summer, be seeing me wandering around in the backyard either all the time. And just a little bit of privacy, appropriate greenscaping, and I would consent to this. I want to be on good terms with the neighbors. I get along with all the neighbors, but what they've done here is they're calling it a deck. It's not a deck. It's a sunroom. It's a completely enclosed brick room, and there's 2 of them, not one. One, they've got a large back area. And there's one on this side and one on this side, and frankly, I've gone back to the property line with a laser measurer, and I have real questions as to whether those enclosed sunrooms are already encroaching, because when I took measurements, I got measurements as low as 37 feet from the property line. Now, I realize they've got a survey, but there's a real issue there, and I'm willing to overlook all of these issues and just live happily ever after, but I want some privacy like we're used to, and I'm sure they want the privacy too. So appropriate greenscaping, I'm happy and all's well. And my granddaughter has requested I find out whether they have any children her age to play with.
Thank you. Anyone else who'd like to address the board of this matter?
My name is Jay Chandonette. I live at 2159 Red Maple, right next to John, behind them. One of the things that I think if we go, you have a picture here of the blow up of that. If we could go back to the original view, I don't know, the previous one, I guess, that had the shows the easements and everything. And what you can see is that they put this house as far back as possible. This is brand new, by the way. No one's living in it. It's in the process of being constructed right now. And if they would have thought of this, known about it a year ago, or 2 years ago probably, could have moved everything forward, no problem to this at all. I think moving it into the deck, on the side of the deck, is all a possible solution for this. It doesn't have to go into the easement, and I think it's just a, I don't have any problems with the size of it. I think, it's great having big houses and more taxes so the rest of us don't have to pay as big taxes. But I think there's just some planning at the beginning of this whole project wouldn't have had any problem with any of this. That's it. Thank you.
Anyone else? So I'm just going to make a clarion call before I drop the gavel. I saw one hand up in the audience before. There is no raising hands in the audience and speaking. So the public hearing is the opportunity to address the board. So you've raised your hand now twice. The proper place to come is the podium. But when I put this gavel down, there's no more raising hands and barking from the chambers. I just want to be clear about that to give everybody an opportunity to address this board.
A neighbor who couldn't make it last minute because their daughter was coming in from out of town with her grandchild for the first time, but she obviously wanted to be there, wanted to give this letter. I don't know if this is too late for that or not.
We'll receive it, so if you want to, just give it to Mr. Lambert. It'll make its way across the table to every member of the board and be received by the staff for the record. So I'm not seeing anyone else to address the board on this matter, so yes.
Just so that gentleman who was raising his hand is aware that he can come up and speak before you put that gavel down.
I think I was abundantly clear about that matter, yes. So the public hearing is now closed. Sir, the public hearing is closed.
Oh.
I asked for you several times to come forward, so I'm sorry.
You were talking to the gentleman, so.
No, I was speaking to the chamber. So I'm sorry, we have rules here for obvious reason. So what I'd like to do is ask the vice chairman, Mr. Eisenbacher, to address the board on any other communications that this board has received on this matter.
The one that we're passing matches the one that we received on the table earlier today, yesterday, and it was given to us on the table. That was in opposition because it should have been built closer to the street, so the variance was not needed. And then the second one we have on the table, the gentleman is the same that spoke to the same matter.
Thank you. So now we bring it back to the board table for further inquiries or any possible action. Mr. Gauss.
I have a quick comment more for ourselves. I'm not against big houses, big decks, big chimneys, fireplaces. Where I'm at right now is I'm struggling to find a hardship. There seems to be other alternatives, or maybe this could have been prevented by earlier planning. So right now I'm just mulling over the hardship question, and I'll leave that kind of open-ended.
I think Mr. McCauley's comments are well thought through, namely, what's the hardship? I think the gentleman who's the neighbor in the close to the home stated quite well as well, which was this could have easily been adjusted before something first shovel was put into the ground. And I think to the petitioner's concern that taking the fireplace into the deck would make it potentially too warm. Well, we don't have to have, a forest fire proportion, to enjoy a deck. Secondly, with the technology they have now, they could easily insulate it so it wouldn't be overwhelmingly hot, meaning the heat would only come out and permeate the room in one area. So I would suspect that any vendor could easily take care of that. Any other members of the board? For comments or possible action? Mr. Lambert.
I don't know if it'll go anywhere, but I'm going to move to deny the variance request because of the lack of clear hardship being stated by the petitioner.
There's a motion for denial of the request to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. McCauley. Seconds. We now have discussion on the main motion. Is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, Mr. Evans, I believe we're prepared for a vote.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. McCauley.
Let me clarify, yes means that I'm saying no to the...
Yes is for denial,
That's
yes.
correct. Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Koopa.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Agawas.
Yes.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Motion is approved, which means the petitioner's request has been denied. We move on to the next item, 5B. That's related to Paul Taylor for Taylor & Associate Architects, related to 1311 Maple Lane. Mr. Evans, could you please present to us on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This subject property is at 1311 Maple Lawn. It's a variance to allow a proposed daycare to have the outdoor play area within the required front yard setback. The zoning ordinance requires the play area to be outside the front yard setback. Subject property is located at the southwest corner of Maple Lawn and Northwood. This area is located east of Crooks and north of Maple. That's a close-up of the neighborhood with the zoning overlaid in colors. The subject property and all the properties to the north, south, and east are zoned integrated industrial business. We do have some multiple family residential to the northwest of this property, and to the southwest of this property is our Maple Road form-based zoning. And this is a close-up of the corner with the property outlined in red. And the subject matter, I'm going to zoom in a little later, involves this front yard area along Maple Lawn. Now, this is the site plan provided by the applicant, and I've highlighted a fence that's going to enclose the outdoor play area. Now, the required front yard setback in this zoning district is 30 feet. So what that means is that the play area has to be set back at least 30 feet from this property line along Maple Lawn. As proposed, it's set back 20 feet. So they need a variance from the board in order to put that play area in that location. And they do have an application into the Building Code Board of Appeals for a fence variance to allow the fence, and that's a style of fence that they're going to install, to allow the fence in the front yard. And the front yard would be the area between the front building line and Maple Lawn. So this is a two-step process, and because this meeting came first, they decided to go to the zoning board. I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
I have a question. It's hard to see on that layout where the sidewalk is. Can you...
Let me see if I can zoom in for you. I don't see it labeled on this.
It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it works for everyone, let me back up to the aerials and see if that gives us a perspective. Okay. Well, that's what the aerial shows. Now, these red lines I just superimposed to try to outline the property just for the purposes of presentation, but the orange lines are actually the ones that, according to the GIS, let me do this one, are indicative of the property lines.
Okay, so it looks like the property line is a standard 1 foot off of the sidewalk?
That would be typical based on the GIS. In order to know for certain, we would ask for a survey, but that would be typical.
Thank you.
Anything else for staff? By a member of the board? Okay, we're going to call forward the petitioner on this item. For the record, if you would both introduce yourself and tell us how you're related to the property.
Good evening, I'm Paul Taylor. I'm the architect for this project.
Welcome.
My name's Toby Beekner. I'm the owner of the property.
Welcome. Thank you. So would you like to share any information with us?
Just for clarification, there is a sidewalk. It's almost at the curb. I apologize for not noting it as such, but it stretches right along the curb at Maple Lawn. I think it shows it on my drawing, but it just doesn't, I didn't note it. Right there. Yep, you almost had it. Up. Right there. That's the sidewalk. If you also look at the profile that I drew through that area, it shows the relationship between the sidewalk and existing berm and where the fence is proposed to be.
Okay, thank you.
I also submitted a narrative about the variance request, and if anybody's got any questions on that, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Any questions of the petitioner?
I have a couple.
Please.
As I'm looking at it, I see 3 entrances in and off that fence going to the outside. What's the purpose of those entrances?
The northernmost one in the center there is assuming a fire, that the fire trucks would park on Maple Lawn and pull their hoses through that fence to the, where it calls for existing FDC, that's the fire department connection. So that's the easiest way for them to get the pumper truck connected to the building. The other 2 at east and west are for, again, in an emergency situation and the kids were exited to the play area, they could then be escorted east and west to their parents' vehicles to pick them up.
Also, where the existing fire are your gas lines and your gas meter there also?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The electrical's on the opposite side of the building, but what you see as a fence area is going to be the same exact kind of fence, protecting the kids from that equipment. And that fence would not be locked so that the fire department can get direct access to it. Again, and that's also because that's also the reason for a gate-type fence, so they can throw it open and get full access.
One last question. If you're cutting into the berm, what's your plans for the remainder of the berm, or are you going to leave the berm there?
We're not really cutting into the berm. We're just positioning basically off the crest of the berm. So if you were standing on the sidewalk and viewing this fence, you'd only see the top 5 feet of it because it's past the crest of the berm. But so the berm would stay intact.
So you're saying this fence would not be built on the berm at all?
It's on the berm. It'd be on the edge of the berm,
okay,
not at the crest.
Okay.
Or I should say on the downslope of the berm, not at the crest.
Okay.
Mr. Lambert.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. First, is the entire building going to be used for the daycare center?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then the second one is, one of your neighbors on Crooks expressed some concerns about safety, and I assume that when you go to the Building Code Board of Appeals to talk about the fence, a lot of those safety issues would be addressed at that time?
And I can address some now if you like.
Sure.
You saw the design of the fence. It's that way as opposed to, say, a chain link or a horizontally designed fence so the kids can't climb it. And it's not completely solid. Those are alternating slats, so the wind can go through so it won't blow the fence down. But at the same time, they're vertical slats so the kids can't climb it. And also, when the kids are out there playing, they won't become a distraction for any traffic that's on Maple Lawn.
What about as far as vehicular traffic? Is the fence designed to be built in case a car were to come off the street into the fence?
Well, that car would have to come off the street and then over the berm.
Okay.
But no, I mean, if somebody wanted to go through that fence with a vehicle, they could probably do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other member of the board? Okay, if you could have a seat, please. Thank you very much.
You understand our hardship?
Yes.
I just want to make sure you got that. Great. Thank you.
Would you like to restate it? You're at the microphone.
As long as you guys know it, I mean, we have a lot of code with the state that's required to run a daycare, and we have to have outside availability and certain square footage, and that's what we're trying to get, so we can meet those codes.
And is this the only area on the whole property that this could go to be compliant with the requirement?
Not a lot of options because of the parking on the east and the west side.
The irregularity of the lot, yeah.
It's just weird shape, but
The biggest difficulty is the fact that this property has 2 front yards. And there's no other side yard. There's no good side yard to put it in. We could put it in the back, but that would destroy any parking back there. Plus the kids would be playing on a hard surface. This way they're playing on a lawn. Also, it would, if the play area was in the back, it disrupts emergency access to the building. So if there was a case of either an ambulance or a fire truck, they will have access 360 degrees around the building, coming from the back, across into Mr. Buechner's other property, through his parking area, and then across the front. So there's 360-degree access to the building if we put the playscape where we got it.
Okay, thank you.
I got a couple
Vice
questions.
Chairman Eisenbacher.
City staff brought up that you're supposed to have a 30-foot setback from the sidewalk, and your plan shows a 20-foot setback. Are you requesting a variance for that setback as well? Or was your intention to request a setback, or a variance for the setback on the fence?
Okay, I was going under the assumption we required a 20-foot setback because of where the property line is. If it's only a 10-foot setback, then I guess I'm applying for a 10-foot setback.
What the code says is it doesn't talk about setback in that section. It says the play area can't be in the required front yard. So when you do the math, the required front yard is 30 feet, and it's indicated that it's set back, the front edge of the play area is 20 feet back. So that's simply the mathematical equivalent.
Okay.
Does the proposed resolution take that into account, or would we need to modify it?
We don't have a proposed
Or no,
resolution.
there's no proposed, okay.
Right.
So, okay. And then the second question is, have you thought about any landscaping? Because that's going to be a
Yes, sir.
long, flat.
If you, it was also part of my submittal to landscape that entire space along the existing berm with various evergreens along there to settle down the look of the fence. You just don't have a stark fence there, but there's interspersed with a lot of green.
I don't see that. Did anyone else see it? Okay, we missed it. Do you have a copy with you?
I'm afraid I don't, but we fully intend to completely landscape that berm area. I understand right now there isn't any. There's just a tree, I think, in that whole front yard. But our intent is to, and that's, I think, required by code anyway. But
We'd be happy to have that
city-
noted that we will do that, and I have a daughter at Michigan State, so green and white is good.
I have a couple more questions. I noticed that in the back of the property, the rear, that you have a play area back there. That's green grass area, correct?
There's going to be a play area exactly opposite, on the opposite side of the building of this. There's a 20-foot green strip in there, and we're going to take advantage of that area as well.
So then you're looking at this front as a second play area, in a sense?
Correct.
The other one doesn't make enough. We needed more
Right.
space than that.
Yeah.
By
Because of
code.
the requirements.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, do we have the requirements that they need for daycare for much?
Yeah, this is state requirements for daycare.
I haven't seen any information, and I don't know what it is, what the state requires for playground outside.
In my narrative, I explained that the smaller daycare, as a smaller outside play area, would be for the littler kids, so that the big kids aren't stepping all over them when they're out. This way we can segregate the little kids from the big kids.
But again, I'm looking for the required green space you need for these kids to play on. I don't know what your requirements are for state regulations for a daycare.
I didn't think to bring them, but
Okay.
Sir, excuse me, Mr. Chair, can we ask you to just bring the microphone closer?
certainly.
Thank you.
All right. I didn't think to bring them, but there is a certain square footage area per child, and that smaller 20-foot wide belt on the other side yard isn't sufficient to meet those requirements.
Anyone else for the petitioner? Okay, you can have a seat. Thank you very much. Mr. Eisenbacher, can you give us a update on the communications, then we'll go to the public hearing?
We have one on the table from Mr. Todd Purcell's, which is one of the adjacent properties at 2040 Crooks. He's worried about safeguards for the safety of the children.
Okay. So now we're going to open the public hearing. So if a member of the public would like to address the board on this matter, please step to the podium. If you'd like to address the board on this agenda item, please step to the podium to speak to the board. Public hearing is closed, and we now bring it back to the board for consideration, dialogue, inquiries, or action.
I'll be quite honest, my background's in education, and I struggle with this greatly. Putting kids in the front yard of a area that's basically, it's industrial business zoned, and there's an asphalt company back there that uses Maple Lawn as a main entranceway coming into there. So safety is a big issue for me as far as that's concerned. I don't believe there's enough information about what the requirements are for a daycare for green space for them to play. I don't think there's enough information on landscaping for it. I'm concerned about sight lines coming out of the parking lot to the west, trying to turn, going north or turning west on the Maple Lawn. I don't know how those sight lines would be. I struggle with this because I just don't think that there's enough information. And my question is, if the back play area does meet the requirements that they have, then I don't understand the need for this one. So.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Any other member of the board? Mr. Lambert.
Yeah, following up on those comments, I mean, I think there's clearly a hardship with this piece of property because of the unique way it's shaped, but I would agree that probably what would be appropriate would be to postpone action on this so that number one, we could have filed with the application whatever the relevant state code is that would require the two different play areas, and secondly, maybe either we should address or the Building Code Board of Appeals would address safety issues with the fencing and that facing area onto Maple Lawn there.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. My thoughts on the matter are this, that the landscaping information, hearing from a petitioner saying, don't worry, there's going to be enough. Well, there's good actors in the world and there are some bad actors. So I think, yes, we should get more information on those set of plans. Secondly, I recalled during the discussion today about children's safety, about the recent first big bad snow we had here. And I was doing some shopping up by Lakeside Mall. And it was shocking how many cars hit things off the road really, really hard. So on a snowy December, January, February in Michigan, I don't think that a berm, like that particular berm, would necessarily stop any vehicle if it was a bad icy day. So I would prefer to see something back from the petitioner, installing more safety in secure fencing. It doesn't have to be every foot, obviously, but I'm not in the world of building secure gating or fencing, but I know it's out there, and I'm sure it's more expensive. But I think, obviously, this is something I'd like to hear more about, and perhaps even from the traffic engineer for the city. And if that's not appropriate, Mr. Evans, perhaps from the police department. It is an irregular shaped lot, so I think there is a hardship. But it's an irregular shaped lot that is going to be housing children outdoors, and nobody wants a tragedy in this city. And I think my colleagues here on this board would share that concern in their own way. So those are my simple thoughts. Any other member of the board? Mr. Desmond.
Looking at the actual child care center rules as per the state of Michigan on michigan.gov, in Rule 170, Section 1A, they do indicate that in order to be compliant, they have to have a certified playground safety inspector, who is a certified registered person, conduct the inspection after the fact. So, I mean, they're going to determine, that inspector is going to cover some of those safety level requirements as per the state. They also indicate that the outdoor play area has to be at least 1,200 square feet if there are children in attendance for 3 or more continuous hours within a day. So that 1,200 square foot mark is they don't have an upper limit, it just has to be at least 1,200 as per this document. So, at least safety-wise, if there's already a requirement at the state level for a safety inspector to come through and judge whether or not this is going to be a safe structure, I'm a little bit more comfortable, and that's as a father of 3 children. If you've already got some oversight of that, I'm comfortable with that. Now, whether or not that 1,200 square feet is if this meets that, or if it could back up another 10 feet and that meets the 1,200 square feet, I don't know if we have a number of what all of this green space currently is, or how close that comes to that 1,200 square foot mark. But I based on the irregular shape of the lot, I would lean towards granting a variance for this personally. But if it's going to be tabled and more research done, I'm not going to be uncomfortable with that either. So. That's it.
Any other member of the board?
Can I make a comment? I don't know if it's appropriate to use this. If it says 1,200 square feet, that back area across the back, which if I look at the size of the building, it says 176 feet by 20. That would give them over 2,500 square feet of play area, which would be adequate for that. So again, that would give them what they would need for the state requirements, just with the back play area that they're intending on doing. So, yeah, safety.
I would prefer to wait for more information. I would prefer that we let the applicant come back with some information on the green spaces, the plantings, as well as screening.
I would even wonder if the applicant already has a certified playground safety inspector that they're working with, if we can get some kind of documentation from them that this is already compliant with their requirements or something like that. I don't know if that's something you have already or if it's something that you can have, or...
Would you like to recall the petitioner?
Recall the petitioner if you'd like to answer, please.
Petitioner can come forward, please.
We have a series of hoops that we have to jump through, and one of them, biggest one being the state of Michigan. It's at that time, once we get our construction drawings done, it's at that time that we would go through the state, and the play areas would be one of many things that they would review. So we're kind of that's downstream a ways from where we're at.
So even in the event that this variance was granted, there's still then the second level of analysis, work you have to go through to get this actually done. Right. So, okay.
Right. And just so that we're all on the same page, this play area, this outside play area, is only in decent weather, basically spring, summer, what have you, because they're in the, if you saw the floor plan that I submitted, there's a huge indoor play area as well. Now that doesn't qualify as outside play area because it's inside. But in weather like we've been having, the kids would not even be outside. They'd be inside.
Do you mind if I speak? So I own the building just south of that too, and if you could pull it up, Paul, you can see. But we have a playground and the building just south of that. It's on the front of the building. We had a variance, it was approved. We have specs we have to meet. The 1,200 square feet is a minimum. My current building has 6 classrooms. This will have 15. So we need a lot more than that rectangle right below. We're going to have a play space there. That's not enough space per the code. And you guys bring up great points all the way around. We need to have more data to share with you to the landscape, and we got to document it. We have it. We need to give it to you. So I definitely hear what you're saying. But we need that upper rectangular space, or I can't open that $1.7 million building for kids. Safety is what I do for a living. I have children nonstop in the 4 buildings I own in Troy. And that's what I do for a living. My kids are there, and my grandkids will be there. So it's a huge, safety is the whole thing. He's actually one of my customers, and his wife works for me, so he knows it as well. Trust me, safety is the whole thing. So I hear every word you're saying. We got to make sure we have good ingress, egress. I know that building very well. I'm from Troy. I'm there as much as anybody, and I get the traffic patterns and everything. We got to make sure it's safe. So we owe you some details, so I think you guys bring up valid points.
Thank you very much. Would someone like to make a motion? Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
I'd like to make a motion to table this item until the next meeting.
To the January 2018 meeting.
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second. Yeah.
Mr. Desmond seconds. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing that there isn't anyone, we will move to a vote. Mr. Evans.
Mr. McCauley.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Koopa.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Agawas.
Yes.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
So this will be on the agenda before us next month. Moving on to the next item, David Goodenough, 3445 Talbot. And Mr. Evans, could you please present to us here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This matter involves adding on to a house a front yard setback variance. The subject property on 3445 Talbot is located in a residential area north of Big Beaver and east of Livernois. Specifically, it's outlined in red here on the west side of Talbot. And everything you see on this zoning map that's yellow is single-family zoning. The exception being the purple is the assisted living center on Livernois. Now, this is the site plan he's provided. In this perspective, Talbot is at the bottom of the drawing. Now, all the hatched-in area, that represents new construction, and the subject matter of this variance involves the addition of the garage to the front of the house. Now, the zoning ordinance requires that any additions to the house be set back at least 25 feet, and they're proposing a 22.33-foot setback So in order to proceed, he's requesting relief from the board. We have included a floodplain map in your packet that shows in the blue is the 100-year floodplain and the orange is the 500-year floodplain. So I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Any questions for Mr. Evans or comments? Mr. Lambert?
Mr. Evans, and maybe the petitioner will know this, but didn't we just approve a similar variance for the home next door to it a couple of months ago?
Yes, yes.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we're going to call the petitioner forward and hear from you as far as your relationship to the property.
Yeah, I'm Dave Goodnow, I'm the owner. So I guess just the main points are that we do have that current garage in the back, but the issue with that is that it's on the floodplain a little bit, and the people who built it, it's level with the house, but it's probably brought up maybe 5 or 6 feet off the, anywhere behind that. So it's basically rapidly built up. There's like a kind of a really steep hill right behind the garage, and I think because of that, the garage is cracking, so the floor is cracking. It's kind of sinking a little bit almost. And then the issue is that it's so close to the house right now that we can get 2 cars in it, but we have to basically angle one of them like very steeply. So I'm the one who has to angle in there, and I can get in, but it's not really an ideal setup. So we're looking at the different choices. We can't really put it next to the house because there's not enough room for a 2-car garage next to the house. We can't push it back further because then we're in the floodplain more, and then, there's issues with building it up and doing all of that. And then our neighbor actually had an idea to expand his house and put a garage in front, so that gave us an idea that, hey, maybe that's a good idea. So that's kind of how it all came to be. If we put it in the front, we're able to then have a 2-car driveway in the front. We don't have to go in diagonally. It's on solid ground up there. It's not built up. We can then level off the back area where that garage is currently and kind of return it to the way it used to be.
Thank you. Is there a member of the board who'd like to inquire of the petitioner? Okay, you can have a seat. Thank you. So we're going to open the public hearing on this matter. If you'd like to address the board, please step forward to the microphone and identify yourself. If you'd like to address this board on this matter, please step to the podium. Okay, we'll close the public hearing. We'll bring it back to the board, but first to Vice Chairman Eisenbacher for any communications like he'd like to report.
I can find nothing on the table and nothing in email for this item.
Thank you very much. Now back to the board for further consideration, conversation, possible action, or inquiries of staff. Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
As Mr. Lambert mentioned, this is virtually identical to the one that came before us a couple months ago. The plans submitted look very nice. Looks like it'd be architecturally congruent with the neighborhood, and there's a definite hardship with the land with the floodplain. Excellent definition of what a hardship is, and it's a very good solution for the property. So I would like to move to approve the variance.
Second.
Moved by Eisenbacher, seconded by Desmond for approval of the items as far as the petitioner's request. Any discussion by a member of the board on the motion? Seeing none, Mr. Evans, we are prepared to vote.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Koopa.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Agawas.
Yes.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. McCauley.
Yes.
Congratulations, you have your variance. Have a very good night. Now on to our final case. We are now moving on to Barden Land Company, LLC, adjacent to 660 East Long Lake. And the Barden Land Company has a representative here, I'm sure in a second, but Mr. Evans, if you can present to us on this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This property is located south of Long Lake Road and west of Rochester Road. It's the flag-shaped parcel outlined in red on the overhead. there's a close-up of the parcel. The subject property and all the surrounding property in yellow is zoned single-family residential. Now, the crux of this variance involves the lot frontage along Nada, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. So this matter involves a proposed lot split that was denied by the assessor. This is the existing parcel layout for Parcel B, and that's the proposed layout. I've outlined the borders of the two requested parcels in blue just for clarity. And again, we're going to go back down to Nada Drive, because with this proposal along Nada, that becomes the front yard because it is adjacent to a street. And that's a close-up there. The ordinance requires that there be frontage of 85 feet, and in this instance, the Nada right-of-way alone is only 60 feet wide. So in order to proceed with this lot split, he's going to need a variance from the required 85-foot frontage. There is a proposal to extend Nada that is associated with this property, with this developer, and that could be done according to the assessor's comments you received in your packet tonight. And I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
If you could jump back to that picture you just had up, there's a very skinny strip there on the, next to 648, between the red and 648.
Here?
No, down,
Further south,
down,
on the other side
there.
of the street.
Yeah.
That's just a random strip connected to that property to the south of 648 and 624?
I believe that if we take off the red that I superimposed, that's supposed to represent a property line. Now, those are overlaid by Oakland County GIS based on legal descriptions and photos that are taken from thousands of feet in the air. So the GIS, while reasonably indicative, may not be 100% accurate. That red line in there is just mine to show the boundaries of the property. That's a zoom in. So we believe, and the assessor believes, that Nada right away, well, it does come right up to the property line.
Okay.
So it does touch, and so does 648 and the property to the north, so they border.
Okay.
Any other member of the board? Okay, we are going to ask the petitioner to come forward. Good evening. Please identify yourself and your relationship to the property in question.
Good evening. My name is Dennis Zavrakis. I'm from Bryden Homes. I am the owner of the property.
Welcome.
Most of it. Welcome. Who was the gentleman who brought up the strip?
Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
A little clarification for you, everybody, on that first before I get going. That is a spite strip that is owned by Choice Development Company, which leads to the back behind 648, and I think 624 also. That was originally intended and still is for the detention basin for that subdivision that was developed. So it was supposed to be deeded over to the city of Troy a long time ago, according to Nino, but there are certain criteria that doesn't get approved, so the city doesn't accept those parcels. So it's still a detention, part of the detention basin is what I'm had been told and aware of from my engineer. So all that vacant property, including behind the red is city-owned property, which is also part of all the detention area. So it is owned, it has a tax ID number, but I don't think it's being taxed. I don't believe.
Okay. So that's just the access to that.
14 foot from 648 to where my property line is, that's the dimension of that little strip, and it leads to the back. It's access. Engineering, City of Troy Engineering would have required that for access to get back there, plus the part that's on Somerton for access.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other member of the board? I'm sorry, do you have more information? Okay,
My
please.
little,
Yeah, please.
I'll try and keep it short.
There was a pause, and I just jumped the gun too soon.
All right. So yes, my name is Dennis Savrakis. I'm from Bryden Homes. I'm here tonight to ask you to, approve this lot split request. I'll give you a quick little brief history on it, and hopefully I don't go too far into it, but it does help explain why I'm here also. So originally, if you can all see it, this was approved as a 5-lot development back in 2005, 2006. 2 lots facing Long Lake Road, 3 lots in the back to be developed with a cul-de-sac. At that time, I was approved, but did not pull permits because of the downturn economic times. I put it on hold, canceled, the project stopped. Glad I did. So in the meantime, during the downturn, which I'll call a drastic downturn for me as a builder, pushed me to cancel it. They worsened, the economic times have worsened. I ended up putting the front property, or I should say all the property, up for sale with no buyers. We ended up getting a request from Mr. and Mrs. Patel to purchase the front of the property, parcel A and B in the front. So at that time, we split what we could, sold parcel A to Mr. and Mrs. Patel. He was adamant that he wanted all the frontage on Long Lake Road so that potentially he could build 2 houses there, possibly family members were also. So we kept the back half. For tax purposes, we couldn't get a tax ID number for parcel B1. It was all combined, as you see it today. Since then, Mr. Patel has passed away. Mrs. Patel is still here. She's in the audience. She has built a brand new home on parcel A and has recently moved into it. So they still, by deed, own B1, and I own B2, the back half. Unbeknownst to all of us, including the city, in my opinion, in your packet of information that I submitted was, Paul, if you want to put it back up, about the current configuration. So at the time I got my approvals, there was a gentleman in the engineering right-of-way department, Mr. Dennis Stevens, who, in my opinion, maybe prematurely recorded the right-of-way and the easements on this property, which no one knew up until this 2017. You have the next one that shows the right-of-way. There's one more. There's one more after that showed this. Yeah, that one. So when we ended up getting this approved, the right-of-way portion was recorded by Mr. Dennis Stevens along with the easements for the development. So everything in green here was recorded and deeded to the city of Troy in 2006. Everything in pink that you see are easements that were recorded against the property. That was the intent, and it still is my intent. No one knew about this because at the county level, it was not recorded to the proper tax ID number. County made a mistake. I went and talked with Mr. Brian Crank at Oakland County a few months back. He had found the problem. The rear property that the city owns is where Mr. Stevens, I should say, where the county recorded these documents, so no one knew for the past 9 years that this was recorded against the property. So the idea is to, after all this time, split B1 from B2 to create 2 tax ID numbers. Mrs. Patel then can go along her way and what she wants to do with her property in the front, And my intent is still to develop it as per plan with 3 lots, not one house. So to do that, we need a requested variance to allow for 2 tax ID numbers to separate the 2 for tax purposes. So we each get our own tax bill, and that's the idea tonight. So I don't feel, there's no dimensional characteristics that are going to change. There's no physical characteristics that would change. Everything complies with zoning requirements for building residential single-family houses. It would do substantial justice to me, to Mrs. Patel, and to the city to make this more a normalized condition with tax ID numbers. It was the original spirit and intent from the approved site plan and underneath the current zone district. I have supporting letters from Mrs. Patel and from the neighbor at 648 Nada. I spoke with them on last Saturday, and the other adjacent neighbor to the north also would give their approval. I can pass out 1 or 7.
You can do all 7 if you like, and then we'll just give one of those copies to Mr. Evans. It'll be easier for us to review it. You cannot be addressing anything verbally. It has to be at the microphone.
The first one there was from Mr. and Mrs. Rosati, 648 Nada, for their approval. They're the ones immediately on the dead end of Nada to the west, would be the southwest. And then Mrs. Patel at 660 East Long Lake. And then the other neighbor, Mr. and Mrs. Samantre at 649 Nada, gave me their verbal on Saturday. And hopefully if there's any questions, I can answer them.
And if one of our members over on this side can pass a copy of each of these to Mr. Evans whenever you're done, for the record. Any questions of this petitioner, Mr. Lambert?
So you're essentially asking for the lot split for tax purposes or to get separate tax ID numbers?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
My intent is not to build a single home on there, especially the way the configuration has been recorded already. My intent would still be to, turn that into 3 lots, 3 residential houses to match the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
Do you have timing for your anticipated?
I do not. I have been a small builder for 25 years, some developing in the city of Troy, nothing big. But between the economic downturn and a number of other factors, I'm not ready yet. I hope to be soon, but I do not have a timetable to let you know right now.
Any other member? Okay, thank you very much.
All right. I'm going to leave it up here or take it?
You can leave it there or you can take it back. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so now we are going to open the public hearing on this matter and ask any member of the public to address the board on this issue. Please identify yourself and any relationship to the property in question. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Joe Rinke. I'm the son-in-law of Indu Patel here in the audience, and I'm representing her here today, so thank you for your time. Number one, I just want to highlight in terms of when you talk about hardship, it is to the benefit to create 2 different tax IDs. It eliminates any debate or consternation around having to share that responsibility. Just so you know, we constantly get delinquent or late notices, and we're honest tax-paying citizens. We want to make sure the taxes are in and in on time, and that's what we strive to do, and this will definitely benefit that situation. Also, when you take a look in the future, Ms. Patel would like to sell that property or to build on it, and I'm one of those folks that would be interested in building on it. So if the property line is truly established, again, it makes the tax ID allows for a very clear delineation or separation of those taxes, and then they're not lumped together and worrying about delinquent taxes and this and that nature. So from that perspective, from that standpoint, we believe that this is a good thing, and we fully support it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Any other member of the public who'd like to address the board on this matter, please step forward to the podium and identify yourself. Any other member of the public? Public hearing is now closed, and we move to Vice Chairman Eisenbacher with any communications. I see a couple here.
Yes, we received one from Mr. Licari, City Assessor. That's on the table that talks about several of these issues with this item. And then we received one from Linda Thiefold at 646 East Long Lake. She has the property to the west of this parcel. And she is not in favor of the request.
Okay, thank you.
And the two that were handed out.
Right, and the two from the petitioner. So this lengthy letter from Mr. Licari, I think I'd like to inquire of our city administration, especially the last sentence regarding the construction related to a cul-de-sac extension. Mr. Evans, can you address this? I'm sure you may be somewhat familiar with this communication.
Yes, and I did have some discussion with Mr. Licari. I did ask for clarification the last 2 days, but he was out sick. But it's Mr. Licari's opinion that if he does do the cul-de-sac extension, as somewhat indicated on the overhead I have now, there would be no need for a variance from this because there'd be subsequent room for additional lots on that southerly portion.
So if the developer goes this route, then there would be no reason for him to be here tonight in front of us.
Right, because that frontage is going to go away because he's going to have the frontage due to the cul-de-sac being built. You have more than 85 feet.
Okay.
So
the difficulty is, it's a timing problem where he's not prepared to build that cul-de-sac, but he's already sold the property and the person who purchased the property wants to be able to use the property. How does that fall within our purview of hardships? I mean, obviously it's a hardship timing-wise because he wants to do something in the future, but he needs something now.
I don't think it does fall in our difficulties because it's a question of taking care of what he needs to. There's no physical difficulties. The tax IDs would be created if he builds the cul-de-sac and then comes back and gets the parcel switch. But I'm looking at one of the questions I had that he brought up.
let me just interrupt for a second. Vice Chairman Eisenbacher, were you inquiring of city staff? That's how I interpreted that. And so you would be out of order at this moment. No, it's okay. We'll get to you just a second. Or if he's just wanting to further make more comments because no one else was recognized at this point.
Just looking at our page 2 statement of practical difficulties, obviously it's for the parcel in front of us. It's related to the premises number B. I'm having a hard time with C, the characteristics which makes compliance with the dimensional requirements shall not be of a personal nature. It's not for his person, it's for the fact that the property's been sold. And characteristics that make compliance difficult must not have been created by a current or previous owner. I guess we could argue if it's caused by the county and the recording of how this was done and the downturn of the economy, or if he had a hand in not recording it properly when he had the building permit granted, or building plan granted. And then E, it's not harmful. Obviously, it went already through a zoning, planning commission review, and it was approved in the past. So maybe if you could clarify how the timing hardship.
What I could say relative to your comment is this proposal was not approved. What he's asking for today, he's asking to split it into 2 lots. That wasn't approved. This is different than what was approved in 2005 when he was asking for, I believe it was 3 or 4 lots.
So the lot lines are different.
What's being asked for today is different than what was previously approved, and the assessor was unable to approve it due to the frontage deficiency.
I'd like to look at that.
Sure. You proceed, we'll call on Mr. McCauley in the meantime. Mr. McCauley.
So just to expound on that a little bit, basically what was approved was the adding of a cul-de-sac, which would give him the frontage required to split that into the different lots back in 2006, 2007.
And
What he's asking today is just to split it in 2 without the proper frontage of 85 feet, because there is no cul-de-sac there, there's only 60 feet.
Right. And that can be perhaps, there may be a page in his application, page 61 of the packet, appears to demonstrate that if the cul-de-sac is built, then additional parcels will be created to access that cul-de-sac, as well as one along Long Lake. So I think that illustrates what you're saying, Mr. McCauley,
Okay.
for the previous 2005 approval.
Anything else? Mr. McCauley?
No.
Thank you. Ms. Krupa?
How long is an approval valid for?
Well, that was one of the questions I had for Mr. Licari, and he wasn't in the last 2 days. So I guess I don't have an accurate answer on that.
Okay. I think it's very logical at this point in time to recall the petitioner, because I'm sure he has some further thought on these matters, since his dollars are tied up into this property, and he's the most affected beyond the city. So the obvious question is, why not do the cul-de-sac extension and not go the route that you've done it? Now, you have the right to petition us on anything you want. I'm just curious.
Well, that is my intent, to install the cul-de-sac, which then would alleviate the waiver today.
But aren't you doing it in reverse, like do the cul-de-sac extension and forget about us? Wouldn't that be more logical?
Well, this time I'm not capable.
Okay. I understand.
So from the turning point back in 2005, 2006, with the economic conditions the way they were, that in itself, in my opinion, was a hardship, which I think everybody was pretty much in a hardship at that time. So me personally, still have the property, still want to build on it, still want to develop it, not quite there yet to financially install the cul-de-sac and start developing and building. Soon, hopefully.
Thank you. Just for clarification, economic hardship is not a hardship.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
Financial.
Financial hardship is not a hardship before this board.
Economic times back in 2005, 2006.
Yes.
That's why it was canceled. That's why it didn't go further. So there's a couple of things that I listened to. The recordings are done by the city of Troy for right-of-ways and easements. So Mr. Dennis Stevens had them in his hand to go record them. It's not something that I do. The city does the recordings. So my engineer drafts them. The city records them at the proper time. In my opinion, it was a little premature, so that's the reason why I'm bringing this up, is because there's not really a way to build one home there. The way the right-of-way was already deeded over to the city, that's sort of city property already. The 85-foot frontage or the road frontage, I guess, is, if, in my opinion, if you're going to try and build one home there, what do? You have to develop it. You have to put in the road, 85-foot sewer, water, et cetera, where this is going to be developed into a cul-de-sac. And then there was a question as far as the timing. How long are the approvals for? I think by Ms. Koopa. Approvals, if you don't mind me asking, what approvals were you referring to?
The ones that were given in 2005 or 6.
That was for the development from the planning and engineering departments, but those have time limits on them. I believe they're 1 year, if I'm not mistaken. So at that time, I was, during that hardship time, was basically told everybody we're not going to move forward with it. So this is really to create 2 tax IDs to separate what was sort of approved back in 05, 06, and has since lingered. And in light of the new findings this year with the recordings, I thought that it would be a great opportunity to separate them now, and then between the city, me, and Mrs. Patel, we'd be much happier.
Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
On the plan you have there, was that the plan that was approved? I know that the dates on there are 2005.
Originally in 2005, that was the original plan that was approved for 5 lots, correct. But it was never gone further. Permits were not pulled.
Okay. So
But
you didn't
yes.
pull the permits for all the utilities or for the road construction?
I did not. I stopped before pulling permits.
Okay. But the easements are recorded like...
The easements and the right-of-way.
So the stream has an easement, the road has an easement, and that triangle in the top right of your plan, is that a detention base? Oh, sorry.
Yep, this is a county drain.
Yep.
So this was a 20-foot wide county drain easement given to Oakland County, which still exists, that easement. All of these in pink are utility easements for future utilities, sewer, water, gas, electric. And then the right-of-way for the cul-de-sac, the right-of-way was recorded for the road. So once the road gets installed, then it would be dedicated to the city.
Okay, and then the 5 parcels, 1, 2, okay, and then there's a triangle left over. Yes.
This was left as open space between, back in 05, 06, between me, my engineer, and the city planning and engineering departments decided that's really unusable space. So it was not part of the plan. It was pretty much left to that open space, which I think the county owns. That was the intent. So that would not be part of anything.
Okay.
The lot line stops at this corner and goes back.
Be careful to speak only into the microphone.
Oh, sorry. The lot line hit his.
Better, much better.
Yeah, so the lot line comes across and then goes straight back 151 feet and then back to this corner. City-owned property, I think. And then this is where the other developer still owns, but it's still part of the subdivision to the west. Mrs. Patel, this is where she built. And then basically just dividing that.
Real quick, I have another question for you.
Sure.
When did you say you sold parcel A and B1 to Ms. Patella?
2007, I believe, was shortly after we canceled everything. I think it was 2007, if I'm not mistaken.
That was all part of the same deal?
It was.
But B1 and B2 was always the same tax ID.
Originally, all of this was one tax ID. And then we were able to split this and get tax ID for here and that L-shaped piece.
So you've been paying property taxes on the larger.
Correct.
And, well, I guess it doesn't matter.
Yes. We've been trying to split what we feel is correct, but yes. Yep. Yep. For the past 9 years.
Anyone else for the petitioner?
Excuse me.
Member Colley.
Her son-in-law mentioned that there's an issue with taxes. Has there been an issue with taxes being paid on this property?
There has been over the years, yeah. Just again, back to the economic times and letting them lapse, but still paying to not lose the property. So there had been over the years, yes. And splitting that, creating the two tax IDs would help alleviate that problem, where they would get their own tax bill and I would get my own. And that's the intent right now.
Any other member of the board for the petitioner? Okay, if you could have a seat. Thank you very much, sir. So we are back at the board table with comments, questions, inquiries of staff, or possible action from a member of the board.
Again,
Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
I want to hear my colleagues' opinions, of course, but in looking at the plan, reading the letter from Mr. Licari, and in hearing the petitioner, the hardship seems to be that he didn't split the properties when he got the development plan. But given the situation we're at now, is it possible to vacate the dedicated stub cul-de-sac? Because if you can't vacate the cul-de-sac, the only way it would be developed is basically per the plan he presented, because you can't jump the stream. It's already recorded as the stream as the county's property. They have an easement for it. The way it's laid out, you can only build those 3 properties. There's no choice. I mean, he's locked in on that development plan unless...
I don't know if it could be vacated. I didn't come prepared for that.
Okay.
Mr. Evans, can you, back to the Licari memo, there's a lot here. I mean, this, and we received it, you know, on our table. It's not like we had a lot of time to I mean, I was here 20 minutes before the meeting, and I was not able to give it a lot of attention. But, so the second from last sentence is, in any case, those types of developments are no longer allowed, and the clarifications and corrections to the ordinance were done specifically to prevent exactly what he is trying to do. So, I mean, I don't know the city assessor. I'm sure he's a very fine human being and does his job very well. It seems to me that he seems to think that this is not, how can I put it? I don't want to put words in his mouth, a wise move, if you will. But, you know, listening to the vice chairman here, you know, I mean, what he's saying here makes sense too. And I think most people on this board know I hate to punt month by month by month, but I would really think it would be wise for us to table this the next, our next meeting. I'm sorry Mr. Licari was not feeling well. That's going around this time of year. So things like that happen. So we could table it, have Mr. Evans, you know, load with him on his thoughts. And obviously, Mr. Licari will have access to the record of tonight's meeting to hear what the petitioner says, to hear the board members' comments, and then we could have more information rather than less information next meeting. I think that's a wise course of action. But once again, it makes our next agenda, if we get more applications, longer, but I just think I hate to vote on something without having all the information, especially from the city assessor, who seems to have specific opinions in this matter. So those are my thoughts to my colleagues here. Anyone else? Ms. Koopa?
Yeah, if there's something that I've learned in my 1 year on the CBA is that we don't want to give variances. That's the purpose of our board is not to give variances, but to give them only when it's absolutely necessary. And I think, based on what we have in front of us from Mr. Licari, that we don't have to give this variance if it was done in the proper order. I don't know what's required to separate it into 2 tax IDs without having him build, because if that's what's preventing him, that he needs to build at a later date, there must be some other way to separate those 2 parcels into, I don't understand platting completely, but I went to a class, and there's got to be something that can be done that benefits the tax relief that they want, or the simplification that they want of having 2 tax IDs for the 2 parts of that parcel. Maybe there's something that can be done without us having to basically grant the variance. I would hold off until we have more information.
Thank you. Any other member?
I think our city assistant attorney would also be happy if we didn't grant lots of variances. That's what I've heard from most of our attorneys, that the more variances we grant, the more difficulties we as a city leave ourselves.
You've read my mind, Mrs. Koopa.
So is there a member of the board who would like to take action? Ms. Koopa?
I would like to propose that we table this until we have more information or have a chance to have Mr. Licari present while the petitioner is also present to ask those questions.
Second.
Would you like to, so there's a motion to table until further information is presented and/or the city assessor is present at this meeting. Would the maker of the motion and the seconder, Mr. Desmond, are you open to a friendly amendment to put that to a date certain and put it on the January agenda, and thereby it could also be postponed yet again if you're not satisfied getting the information you're looking for?
Right. I think we should put it on the January agenda.
Okay. So is that, okay, so that is the main motion from the creator and the seconder of that motion, to put that, requesting more information from the city assessor on that important issue that the petitioner is requesting.
In addition, Mr. Chairman, we should ask Mr. Licari to clarify the road dedication, because if you read his email, that is not actually, there's nothing to vacate, Mr. Eisenbacher, because it's not technically been dedicated or accepted by the city. So there needs to be some clarification on that point as well.
I would agree. Would you like to amend the motion, Mr. Eisenbacher, to include that?
Yeah, I'd like to get clarification on that from the city staff,
So-
where it's at in all those easements, which ones have been accepted.
So there's an amendment by Eisenbacher to deal with the easement issue as far as information, and this is an amendment on top of the main motion. So is there a second to his amendment?
Second.
Mr. Desmond seconds, and for discussion purposes, anyone can discuss if this is a good idea or bad idea to ask for that information, but if the Eisenbacher amendment passes, then it changes the main motion, so it would all be together in one big happy package. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, Mr. Evans, I believe we're prepared to vote on the amendment. A yes is to make all these issues all essentially into one motion.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Agawas?
Yes.
Mr. Desmond?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
Mr. McCauley?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms. Koopa?
Yes.
Motion passes. Now on to the main motion, which is the final motion. A yes is for approval. Mr. Evans?
I believe it was to postpone, or?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes is to postpone.
To the January meeting.
To gather information from the various parties.
Okay, all right. Ms. Koopa?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Agawas?
Yes.
Mr. Desmond?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
Mr. McCauley?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Okay, that motion passes. And to the inquiry that was out of order from the gentleman in the chambers, we can't have endless dialogue from the general public on the matter. You can inquire of city staff as of tomorrow morning during normal business hours or anytime thereafter. Moving on to item number 6. Mr. Evans, are there any communications?
There are not.
Very good. Item number 7, miscellaneous business. First item up is board review rules of procedure. Mr. Evans?
Yes, at our October meeting, we did discuss one amendment. We'd like to take a look at that. So I've added that to the rules of procedure. It's highlighted on page 2 there, where we're going to add the opening statement and our procedure. We're actually going to include that as a item in the rules of procedure, and I've also added it to the end to make it part of our rules of procedure. So those are the two amendments that the board discussed they would like to see. I just want to bounce that off the board to show everybody that we've done that.
All right. We don't have to take action on that, correct? Just that it's been incorporated since we requested it before.
Right.
Okay. Any questions or comments or concerns? Mr. Lambert?
Mr. Chairman, I was looking over the rules of procedure, and I didn't want to try to craft language to be adopted because I know we have city staff that are much more capable of doing that. But a couple of additional items I wanted to suggest to the board, and we can decide whether we want to ask staff to move forward on them or not. One is we discussed the fact that if in the rare occasion, it's been very rare, if both the chairman and the vice chairman are not present at a meeting, do we want to have some additional language that would stipulate who would chair the meeting in that case? And the second was that in many organizations, the person that chairs the board is usually the last person to vote. And I don't know how the members of the board would feel about having that as a rule of procedure, that the board chairman would cast the last vote on any issue. So those were a couple of items I wanted to suggest and see how the board felt on those two.
Anyone who would like to comment?
Comfortable with
Mr.
all that
Desmond?
proposed. I mean, I guess the idea of the chairman being a tie-breaking vote, is that like the core of what you're...
Not necessarily a tiebreaker, but just the last person to cast a vote, so.
Okay, well, those themes, they all seem fine. I'm comfortable with all of those things. But I mean, it seems very administrative, arbitrary, but yeah, that's fine. So I have no issues with that.
Just a couple of quick thoughts. So, I've served on a number of public bodies. I serve on another public body currently as well. And it is a little unusual to not have a third in succession to be able to take the gavel. But I did serve as a county commissioner of the Oakland County Board of Commissioners, and we didn't have a third in line. It was the chairman, the vice chairman, and then nothing. And I know the pressure was probably always on the vice chairman to always be there just in case, but so I never saw a problem there. We did have that issue back in August, and where we couldn't proceed because the vice chairman and I were not able to attend. And that was the first time, I think, in all the years I've served on this board that happened. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't address it. So in the other bodies that I've served on, there's a secretary and a treasurer, but in the city form of government, we have the clerk acts as the secretary for the city as far as recording, so that's not an option. Township governments have the clerk serve in that capacity, but that person's also a member of their board, but not necessarily their commissions. But I believe in their township governments, their deputy could do something there. And then, of course, the treasurer of the city is the treasurer and not an officer of any body here. So I'm not opposed to picking, like, you know, I think Mr. Lambert, you and I spoke briefly about this before, about the person with the longest duration of service on the board that's present that night, which would require the city staff to do a little bit of extra work every once in a while to determine who that is at any given moment. To be the ranking member, that would be the, or I should say presiding officer. And then finally on the chairman being the final vote to cast, I don't believe that the city council has that requirement to have the mayor. I think it rotates, if I recall properly. So I don't know if we would want to be out of the rhythm of that, and then we could inquire of the planning commission.
Planning commission just rotates. So I actually like the rotation.
And I can see it both ways, I really can. Sometimes I really like being the last vote because I can count noses to see if I'm kind of on the fence about, wow, I can see how things are going, but other times it's the rotation I think is nice.
Which is nice, because then it gives everybody that chance to be the last person
Right.
and watch.
Potentially, yes. So I would be willing to entertain any motion that you would like to make so we could have just full discussion. Mr. Lambert.
I would move that we ask city staff to draft an amendment to the rules of procedure that would clarify who would be the chair of the meeting when both the chair and vice chair are absent.
Second.
Moved by Lambert, seconded by Eisenbacher for this inquiry of, was it city staff or city attorney?
City staff, they can figure it out.
Is it your preference to be, as a board, is it the preference to be in seniority, or is there another option that you'd like us to consider? I mean, we take direction.
Seniority is fine.
Okay.
I mean, I think I could envision down the road in the future that the most senior member had never been chairman, like Mr. Courtney was on this board forever, and I'm not sure that he was ever chairman. I don't think he ever told me if he was, but that he wouldn't want a chair, just because he had been, I guess we could clarify or change if we found that to be an issue. Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, Mr. Evans, please call the roll.
And this is essentially to direct staff to draft language that would, the senior member presides as chair in the instance that the chair and vice chair are absent. Is that what I'm hearing, everybody?
Right. In a given meeting.
Right, yeah. Okay.
We have more.
Attendance?
Right.
So is this to draft something to be final, or is this something to draft that we all vote again next January, next month?
Yeah, nothing would be final because the city staff would come back with, a thought or a detailed thought, and then this board could consider it or reject it or change it. So there's no binding.
My thought is, you've been very clear, I think, as to what you're requesting. I don't sense any issue in providing something like I did tonight, saying, here's the proposed language. Is everybody okay with it? If we think we need to vote, we can always vote. That's not a problem, just to clean that up. And if there's any adjustments to the language, we can talk about that as well. But I have a comfort level of getting a draft together and getting it to you next month.
Any other comments or questions, concerns? Mr. Evans, I believe we're prepared for a vote, please.
Mr. Agawas.
No.
Mr. Desmond.
Wait, clarify, this is to draft the language is yes, correct?
Not draft, to bring a recommendation.
Then yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. McCauley.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Koopa.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes, motion passes. So we move on to the 2018 meeting dates. Mr. Evans?
And we just, as past practice, we just provide those in the agenda to make everybody aware. Staff has looked at all these dates, and we don't see any conflicts with holidays. This follows our schedule of the third Tuesday of each month. We don't need to take action on it. This is more of an informational requirement, or just information for the board.
Very good. And we have another item, correct?
Right.
7C.
Update at our October discussion, our meeting, the board had discussion about perhaps what's a way that we can make people aware that certain projects need to receive reviews and approvals from the city, particularly construction projects. And one of the things we came up, the thing we came up with right now would be, that's our new resident packet. And I've just put a few pages of it in there. But I've talked to Cindy Stewart, who puts this together, and she's given us a whole page if we want. But it's got facts about, and this is the current table of contents, so I don't think we're going to be buried in there. But we can put in something in there, and I've talked to the building department. They're all for it, to explain to people, hey, here's some examples of projects that you may not be aware of. Here's so you can check with in advance of doing any work, just to see where you stand. Do you need a permit, or what approvals do you need? So we're working on that right now, and I just wanted to report that.
Thank you, Paul.
You're welcome.
Any other comments on this item?
Thanks, good.
So we will move on to item 8, which is public comment. So if there's a member of the public, there's one member of the public here that's not a member of the board, please step forward to address the board on any matter.
Chairman?
Yes.
If you don't know who that is, that's one of the newest members of the city council, so I
Please.
appreciate him coming up and
Yes.
observing our activities.
Thank you. Yes, I was going to say, I've been on the board for many, many years. I don't believe I've seen a member of council come to just sit in this board meeting. So thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Congratulations on your recent election. He's the newest member of Troy City Council. I would just like to make a quick comment for those who are celebrating Hanukkah. Have a blessed Hanukkah. Tomorrow is the last day because it ends at night. So I know I have a lot of friends who have been celebrating, and I wish them very well. And also for those who are celebrating Christmas, have a blessed Christmas to you and yours. Any other member of the board who would like to make a comment this time?
I would like to make a comment. One thing is that to sort of pile on to your comment about Hanukkah, about 3 weeks ago, we had a Hanukkah Diwali event at the temple in Troy, because Diwali is the festival of light, and Hanukkah is the festival of light. And we had samosa. If you've never had samosa are like potato filling around a little dough or whatever, and latkes. And when the whole event was over, I went to see what was left because I didn't get anything to eat because I was moderating the panel, because there was a Hindu panelist and a Jewish panelist. There were no latkes left. So I was like, darn, I didn't get any latkes because I grew up in New York and I liked them. And so then I asked one of my Jewish friends at the Troy Interfaith Group when they had their December dinner, and Ed Chezik happened to mention there's going to be a latke dinner for Hanukkah at the synagogue at Congregation Shir Tikva. And last Friday, I actually went to Congregation Shir Tikva and sang songs that I remember singing as a kid, including the dreidel song. So it was really nice. So if anybody's looking for great latkes and celebrating Hanukkah, Congregation Shir Tikva in Troy is the place to go. And then the other thing I really wanted to share with you is that in September, I went as a member of the Planning Commission to the Michigan Association of Planning Conference, and I took 7 units of classes in a classroom with no windows. And then I followed that up by studying and passing the test, and sometime early in the new year, I will be doing a capstone presentation for the Planning Commission, because it needs to be done for a body that records minutes. I initially thought of doing it here, but I think the Planning Commission would really enjoy hearing, because not all my peers on Planning Commission are certified planners, and by doing this capstone presentation, I would be doing that. It's going to be about something called placemaking. I came to Michigan almost 20 years ago, and Michigan to me is a phenomenal place to move, to raise a family when we don't make enough of it. I love Mr. Hamilton because he moved out of Michigan to go to college, moved out of Troy to go to college, but came back to Troy. So Troy needs placemaking, and so I thought that that would be a really good opportunity to share that. So when I get the date, I will share it with Mr. Evans when I get on the Planning Commission agenda. And so if you would all like to join us at Planning Commission, or at least turn on the TV and watch, I would really appreciate it. So that's my update. And also, January, Planning Commission will be holding its election of who's going to be the Planning Commission representative to the ZBA. I'm going to highly recommend someone else take this spot because it was a great learning opportunity for me. It makes me a better planning commissioner, having been here. But if nobody else wants to take it, you might see me again in January. So,
Thank you.
anyway, that's my, sorry I gave you a little lecture, but.
Any other member? Well, if not, we will see everyone in January.
Thank you.
Good night.
Gavel or something?